What a whirlwind 14, 16 hours it has been for the New York Mets. Out on Kyle Tucker, then out of nowhere, Bo Bichette appears and signs a 3-year deal to join the New York Mets. Where he's going to play, what it means for Brett Beatty, what it means for the rest of the infield, we'll try to explore it all here. That's Jack. I'm Chris. Another edition of the Believe in Mets pod. Jack, how are you, my friend?
I am feeling very conflicted, but I think I would say the emotion I feel most right now is relief, because to give our listeners and viewers a peek behind the curtain here, we were supposed to record yesterday, that being Thursday night.
Thursday night, yeah.
And it was within 2 hours of us deciding that we weren't going to record last night. Kyle Tucker signs with the Dodgers, and we think, okay, we're going to need to recuperate, kind of probably take a different tone to the podcast when we record today, Friday, because the Mets did not end up with Kyle Tucker. And then fast forward 12 more hours to this morning, and the Mets made one of the biggest pivots of the offseason and brought in probably the second or third best free agent still available on the market. So a lot to discuss, but I'm relieved that we waited till now to discuss it all, because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, when we decided to kick the recording to today, it was under the guise of we were waiting on Kyle Tucker, and there were some thoughts that it could linger into Friday. And so we decided, hey, we'll just wait until Friday. And then it was after that decision that all of a sudden he ended up signing his 4-year, $240 million deal with the Dodgers. And I'm even more glad that we didn't do an episode, because I just would have been angry and frustrated. And I don't think it would have really had any value. It would have been just the frustration that everybody else was sharing about the Dodgers doing it again to the New York Mets. And I was kind of hoping that with the benefit of hindsight, we could talk about what was next. We could talk about free agents that were still there, what the plan might be. I was going to make the case that the Mets may want to just sit it out with what the Dodgers have been doing this offseason. And in waiting, we wake up this morning and, right around, 9, 10 o'clock on the West Coast, so like 11 noon on the East Coast, the Mets signed Bo Bichette to a 3-year, $126 million deal. It has opt-outs after the first 2 years. It is no deferrals on the deal. It is just a straight 3 years, $126 million from the New York Mets. And it was a very quick pivot. And Jack, I kind of put myself back in the place when Steven Matz decided to, at the last minute, sign with the St. Louis Cardinals. And then we saw Steve Cohen go scorched earth. And this felt very similar, although I like the move. And I think Bo Bichette makes sense for many reasons for the Mets this season. It does feel like a very quick reaction to, okay, we got beat again by the Dodgers. We have to do something. And Will Salmon wrote a great story in The Athletic that kind of laid the groundwork that the Mets were doing all of this work behind the scenes to be ready in case this happened. They had met with Bichette at the winter meetings. They had talked to Bichette earlier this week. Mendoza had a relationship with Bichette because he managed his younger brother. So there was all of these webs that were kind of being put together behind the scenes for the Mets to have this as their backup option. And the moment Kyle Tucker decided to go to the Dodgers, the Mets kind of spun up that backup plan. And now Bo Bichette is going to be a New York Met. So I guess we'll start there. I don't really want to dwell on the Kyle Tucker thing. I mean, that narrative has kind of been, beaten over the head over the last 12, 14 hours or so, with the Dodgers continuing to be great and the Mets, once again missing out on a big free agent. But they responded in a big way with Bo Bichette. And I do want that to be the focus, because there are a lot of questions that come out of this move, because in our free agency previews, Bichette's a name that's never really come up because you didn't understand the natural fit for the Mets.
Correct. And that's the thing that I keep coming back to, is when you look at the big names on this free agent market coming into the offseason, outside of the Kyle Schwarbers and Pete Alonsos, which kind of, they both stood on their own because they're two power hitters. They're very specific kind of skill set. You're not really looking for them for any kind of defensive addition. You're looking for the power bat to add to the lineup. Mets obviously were not in really on either of them. From everything we've heard, they weren't really looking at Pete Alonso. Maybe Kyle Schwarber they were in on, but didn't end up panning out. And then Kyle Tucker was kind of the biggest name that we had heard the Mets pursue this free agency. He was the number one name on the list. And then the other two that maybe the Mets were in on, or just the other two top hitters on the market, were Bo Bichette and Cody Bellinger. And we talked about Kyle Tucker and how he was maybe going to be a fit on the Mets. Our last episode was talking about what the Mets offer was. It ended up being 4 years, a little bit over, what was it, $200 million? For
220, 4,222. 4,222. Or for 4,220.
And we talked about what the kind of value there. But then outside of Kyle Tucker, the other biggest name free agent that we discussed on the show was Cody Bellinger because of all the ways that he fit in the Mets lineup, the way he fit in the defense, his ability to play both first base and outfield, the two biggest positions the Mets still need to answer for this offseason because of Nimmo departing via trade, Pete Alonso walking in free agency. And when I saw the Kyle Tucker news last night, I thought to myself, okay, the Mets obviously need to make a big pivot here because everyone knew they were out or they were in on Kyle Tucker, right? We saw Steve Cohen himself tweet, "Wait until you see the smoke. We've submitted this offer. We're waiting to hear his decision." And then it didn't happen. And so in my mind, the easy pivot there and the easy pivot that I think probably a lot of Mets fans were thinking is Cody Bellinger's still out there, right? He's the second best option on the market in terms of what the Mets need. He's one of the best free agents still on the market. He's got the highest projection for WAR and power. He would fit really well behind Juan Soto in the lineup. He'd fit really well as a hedge option in left field, as a hedge option at first base if you don't like what Jorge Polanco is doing, if you don't like what Carson Bench is doing in the outfield. All these reasons, Cody Bellinger felt like a really perfect fit. And the reason we didn't talk that much about Bo Bichette is because look at the Mets roster right now. There are so many infielders between not only the major league level with guys like Luis Angel Acuna, Brett Beatty, Mark Vientos, Marcus Semien now as an addition, but Jet Williams, their top prospect, is also an infielder. And so Bo Bichette, while he was one of the top bats on the market, again, in that top 3 range, top 5, if you include Schwarber and Alonso, didn't seem to fit the Mets all that well. And I just am still kind of processing what this signing is going to mean for 2026 and potentially beyond if he ends up sticking out the 3 years, $126 of this contract.
Yeah.
So $126 million of this contract.
I mean, Bellinger still, out of every free agent we've discussed, is the ideal fit for the Mets. And there's a report out there that they are still in on Cody Bellinger, and they could also be snagging him to play first base and or left field. But I do think there's an argument to be made, and I've seen people make it, and I tend to agree with it, that Bichette is more of a fit than Kyle Tucker. And it's something we've brought up here on the podcast that while Tucker is the best overall player that was available this offseason from a hitter's perspective, he wasn't a natural fit for the New York Mets. He was either going to have to play left field where he hadn't played a ton in his career and had been a while, or you were going to move Soto in year 2 of his deal, or you were going to make Tucker a DH and kind of remove one of the benefits that Kyle Tucker provides with being a good defender. It felt very square peg round hole, but when you're dealing with a superstar of Kyle Tucker's caliber, if you can get him, especially on a short-term AAV deal, you do it and you kind of figure it out later. And that's kind of what I think they did here with Bichette, but I also think there are 2 things that help, at least for me, understand why the Mets did this. They needed right-handedness in their lineup. It was something that they were missing. That's another reason why Tucker and to a certain extent Bellinger don't really make a ton of sense, is that the Mets need more balance. They have Lindor, who's going to bat mostly from the left side all season. Soto's going to hit from the left side. They have Beatty, who's going to hit from the left side. Polanco's a switch hitter who's mostly going to hit from the left side. Like they have Carson Bench is a lefty. Like they're going to have a very lefty-dominated lineup, and so they need some pop and just some right-handed presence, and so Bichette checks that box. But to me, and you saw a bunch of people, Will Salmon, Steve Gelbs, John Heyman pointed out that the Mets loved the leadership. They loved what they thought Bichette was going to bring to their clubhouse. And if there's one thing that we learned through the variety of moves and the subtractions that the Mets made this offseason, they felt like they needed a culture change in that clubhouse. And you bring in somebody in Bo Bichette who wanted to win for Toronto, wore his heart on his sleeve, gutted it out, played second base in the postseason and in the World Series, a position that he doesn't play, right? He's a shortstop by trade, but is willing to do what it takes in order to win. And an interesting subplot was teammates with Marcus Semien and has a great relationship with Marcus Semien. And when we talk about getting back to the vibes of 2024, having teammates like Semien and Bichette who know each other and can feed off of each other, that's going to create that emotional bond that I think the Mets were lacking last year. And we've gone nearly 10 minutes without discussing that. He was worth 3.5 WAR last year. He hit 311 with a 357 on base percentage. He hit nearly 20 home runs. Like the projections over the next couple of years, the next 3 years of this deal, bode really well for the Mets. They're paying Bichette for his age 28, 29, and age 30 seasons if he chooses to stay all 3 years for the Mets. I mean, you can't put a deal on a T-better for David Stearns. I'll use the financial flexibility that Steve Cohen gives me. I'll get a player who's still in his prime. I'll pay a premium for it, but I won't pay the tax on the back end for the decline, and I'll get 3 peak years of a player. And if Bichette plays great and he wants to opt out, it's a win-win for both sides because now I free up a spot to move Brett Beatty back to third base, or I'll move another player around in the diamond, and maybe Mark Vientos goes back to playing third, or Jet Williams moves all over the diamond. It just felt like a perfect move, and the little extra cherry on top is he had apparently agreed to a deal with the Philadelphia Phillies for 7 years, 200, and then the Mets swooped in at the last second and said, "Yeah, no, thank you, we'll take Bo Bichette." That's the little cherry on top that I enjoy as well.
Yeah, I think the really big part of the calculus here is the way the market has turned out for some of these top free agent hitters is exactly the way that we kind of discussed the Mets were hoping it would. We hope the Mets, their biggest advantage is their deep pockets. Steve Cohen, being richest owner in baseball, obviously has been willing to spend in the past. And the contrast was the David Stern side of things, as the president of baseball operations for the Mets, has been a lot more interested in the shorter term deals and the flexibility that can allow for prospects to come up, and creating a new core and being able to sign other free agents, whatever. A shorter term deal is kind of David Stern's MO. And for this whole offseason, essentially, we've been saying we're not sure about the fits of some of these top free agents on the market with the Mets, because it seems like a lot of them are going to want some of these longer term deals. That's kind of the way the market has been in the past. You look at just last year, Juan Soto signing his 15-year contract with the Mets. Maybe 5 to 8 years was going to be the range that we were maybe expecting for Bichette, Bellinger, and Tucker. Instead, it's fallen into the Mets' hands, where these stars, bona fide star players, are free agents, and they're taking shorter-term, higher AAV deals, which is exactly the Mets' wheelhouse. And so we saw it with Kyle Tucker. We saw the offer that they gave him, $55 million a year for 4 years. Dodgers ended up one-upping them. And Bichette, his original plan, like you said, was to sign with the Phillies on this longer-term but shorter AAV deal, 7 years, $200 million. Turns out that he's also willing to, as one of the top hitters on the market, take a 3-year deal with opt-outs after the first year and make $42 million a year instead. And I think that is a really big part of why the Mets decided to pivot this way, is they see how the market is shaping out. They see that they can press this advantage that they have. And even if Bichette is not the perfect fit, and that is still what I'm getting hung up on, is kind of the infielder of it all, because the Mets already have so many of those. But he's a really good player, and you laid it out. Like, he hit nearly 20 home runs last year, 3.5 WAR. He's consistently been a guy who hits above 290 throughout his time in Toronto. He's much more of a contact hitter than a power hitter, but that's okay. Like, the Mets would value a guy that can get on base behind your Juan Soto in the middle of that lineup. And at the end of the day, the Mets are now, I think, a better team, especially offensively, now that they added Bo Bichette. And a big part of that, I really think, is because of his willingness to take this shorter-term, higher AAV deal that really just fit what the Mets are trying to do right now in this offseason.
And if you look at it just from Bichette's perspective, right, he had a 7-year, $200 million deal that the Phillies agreed to. The Phillies were going to pay him the 7-200. He gets 3-126 for the Mets. Let's just assume for a second he plays all 3 years in New York and re-enters free agency at age 30. That means on his next deal, he has to get a 4-year, $74 million deal to match the 7 years, 200. I'll take the bet right now. He's getting more than 474 on his next deal when he hits free agency at 30. So he's going to maximize his earnings in a big way. And this is where the Mets can overwhelm a player, right? Because a $42 million AAV for Bo Bichette, let's just call it what it is. It's kind of absurd, right? Bo Bichette is not a $42 million a year player, but this is where David Stearns can keep all of his options open for the short and long-term future to let the kids and the prospects that they're developing get an opportunity to play, while also utilizing the financials. Because I think when everybody thinks of Steve Cohen's deep pockets, they just think, oh, just give Kyle Tucker what he wants. Give him 10 years, $400 million and call it a day. Give him 10 years, $500 million, call it a day. And they'll just outbid for Yamamoto. Give Yamamoto $400 million, $500 million. Where Steve Cohen's money can really, play a major role is here. Because outside of the Dodgers, right? And the Dodgers are very unique, and they're quote unquote ruining baseball depending on who you ask. Other than the Dodgers, nobody appears willing to utilize AAV in the way the Mets are. right? Like the Mets are using AAV as a tool that are kind of obliterating the financials of the sport, but they're utilizing it to their advantage. And Steve Cohen did this the moment he got here. He did it with Scherzer. He did it with Verlander. He did it with Soto. He's now doing it again here with, with the deal that he offered Kyle Tucker, the deal that they ultimately signed with Bichette. Like this is the tool that they feel that they have that nobody else in the sport, again, outside of the Dodgers, is willing to use. Like, I don't think the Yankees would have offered this deal.
No,
And
no.
I think and I don't want to go too much into Bellinger, we'll save that for a future episode. But if they're going to add Bellinger to this, and reports are that they're still interested, I think they can use this same tool because the way that I thought about this today is they offered Tucker $222 million for 4 seasons, right? They just gave Bichette 120. So they had allocated over the next 4 seasons $220 million. Could they offer 120, 130 to Bellinger and call it 250 for 2 players instead of 220 for 1 player over the next 3 seasons? Like, that's a good use of the dollar. So I wonder if that's kind of their calculus in the back of their mind. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is where Bo Bichette is going to play. All reports indicate that he's going to play third base. He's going to be the starting third baseman. He's never played it before. He was a shortstop in the past, albeit not a very good one on the defensive end. The Mets have that lockdown with Lindor. They traded for Marcus Semien to play second base. So Bo Bichette is going to play third base, and this is where I think there's some trepidation. I know it's where you have some concerns about a guy whose arm isn't that great, playing a position that he's never played before, when all we heard all offseason from David Stearns was run prevention, and now his 2 corner infield spots are guys that have never played the position that they're ultimately going to play. And I hear you. I hear the concern. But one, Bo Bichette wants to play for you. You sign Bo Bichette and you figure it out later, right? Secondly, I feel comfortable saying this. One of Bo Bichette or Jorge Polanco is going to work out at their position. Like, I feel pretty good about one of them working out. So if the other one doesn't, you have the DH spot that's wide open right now. And it can't get any worse than watching Mark Vientos play third base last year. Like, that was brutal watching him defensively. And I think the flexibility of kicking Beatty to left field is a great way to keep his bat in the lineup. And if it doesn't work out, you can just move Beatty back to third base. And hopefully by that point, when you're making that decision, Carson Bench can play left field. Because who knows? Who knows what the Mets are going to do the remainder of this offseason. So I'm not as worried about it as everybody else. One, I think Bichette's going to be fine. I think he's going to work hard. Kai Correa, do your magic, man. You're an infield guru. Like, this is where you got to shine because you got 2 corner infield spots who've never played their position. Like, you got to earn that contract that you got from the Mets here working with their infield defense. But if one of them doesn't work out, they've got the DH spot. They have the flexibility with Beatty. Like, they can move guys around. And so I don't think it's something where, like last year, they kind of had to take their lumps and deal with the bad defense all year. I think they'll pull the ripcord earlier this year. And again, when a player like Bo Bichette, who outside of one season when he only played in 81 games, hits 290, 300, like that's exactly what this Mets lineup need. They need somebody who's great with runners in scoring position. Bichette's been excellent at that in his career. He is the perfect fit for this lineup. And so I'm willing to figure it out defensively because I think the Mets have ways to cover the deficiencies if they exist.
Yes, I think a really big and good thing that you mentioned is Brett Beatty kind of being almost the new Jeff McNeil on this current state of the Mets roster, where you project that he gets the versatility to. We've seen him play second base. We know he's had some experience playing in left field. I believe in the minor leagues they had him trying out playing left field down there, at least some outfield position. Obviously, he's a third baseman by trade, and that does open up different opportunities. We talked about it with Cody Bellinger, how his versatility allows the Mets to hedge different options, different positions in different places. I think Beatty and having that versatility gives them similar hedging opportunities, although not quite as good. I do think that, to your point about the DH spot being wide open, I think that it's a easier projection to say, based on defensive metrics, Jorge Polanco works out at first base, and you just decide Bo Bichette's going to be your DH full-time moving forward. Chris, Bo Bichette's fielding range over here on StatCast.
It's not great. It's not great. I'm not going to...
It's not just not great, it's first percentile. That means he is statistically the worst range at his position. Again, shortstop, you obviously need a little bit more range to play a middle infield position. But first percentile in the major leagues at his fielding range, and 36th percentile for arm strength is not ideal. And with keeping Brett Beatty on the roster and having him as an option to play third base, you like the idea that Polanco has the versatility to move to the DH spot if the Mets end up signing a first baseman. But I think Bichette's going to be the more clear and obvious option to move to DH if the defensive thing doesn't work out, because I just think looking at the numbers, that is the one biggest thing that concerns me is you said it. Like David Stern said all offseason, run prevention, run prevention, run prevention. We haven't seen a starting pitching rotation move yet, and we haven't seen a legitimate defensive option at third base or at first base to enhance those positions in a defensive sense and a run prevention sense.
Yes, and I understand the criticism of talking so much about run prevention and then doing what they're doing with Bichette and Polanco, but I do think
And I have to say, like, I know Bo Bichette is a very, very good hitter. Like, that is what you said about he wants to play for you, you sign him and you figure it out. I think that is a absolutely fair take on things. I am just so worried about the lack of defense when that has been so much of the focus. And what David Stearns even said, he heard from other executives or other teams, the Mets defense just wasn't good enough. And like, I love the idea of Bo Bichette. I think he's a really, really good player. Like, the defense is, I can't get past the defense and the fit on the lineup and the defense.
yeah, I mean you're asking him to play a position he's never played while doing that on the other side of the diamond when you talked all offseason about getting better defensively. So it does feel awkward. Again, I know that the report came out that he's going to play third base. I wonder if when we get into the meat of this season, how often Bichette is just DHing and Brett Beatty's playing third base. Like, I wonder what the split is ultimately going to be, right? If Ryan Clifford or if they sign a first baseman between now and the start of the season, like, does Polanco move into the DH role permanently and they have somebody over there at first base? I'm not ready to say for certain that the Mets defense is, this thing we need to worry about again until I see what the final roster looks like at the beginning of the season. And I will say, I think it's very important that as it stands right now, they are going to open the year with Marcus Semien at second base, Francisco Alvarez behind the plate, Francisco Lindor at shortstop, and Tyrone Taylor in center field. So up the middle, you are as strong as you have been in a really long time. And if you're going to
Yes.
build a defense first team, that's where you have to build it. And you believe in Alvarez's defensive skills. Semien, the one thing that you know you're going to get from him is Gold Glove caliber defense. You know what you're getting at shortstop with Lindor. Tyrone Taylor is a wizard out there in center field. If you sign Harrison Bader to play center field, you're getting the same thing there, right? If you wanted to go Taylor in left with, Taylor Beatty platoon in left, Bader in center until Benj is ready, your defensive outfield coverage is going to be great. So I'm not as concerned because, let's face it, if you're going to have two positions on the diamond where you can kind of get away with this, first base is one, although we saw it with Pete last year, when it's bad, it can be bad. And I think you can get away with it a little bit at third base, but just the work ethic of Bo Bichette tells me he's going to work his tail off to do this, because he would not sign up for this contract in this market with this type of pressure to play third base if he didn't think he could do it. Like, if he didn't think he could pull it off. And all I'm asking for is serviceable. Like, he doesn't need to win a Gold Glove. He doesn't need to be, above average. Can you just be replacement level defense at third base? And I don't think he's athletic, right? He's an athletic player, and he showed that over at second base. So I'm hopeful. I understand the concern, but I do think there are ways for the Mets to pivot out of this while continuing to keep their offense intact. And so I'm hopeful that they'll be able to figure this out if it goes south in the middle of the season.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I'm almost more interested in not just seeing what this lineup looks like on opening day, although I have a point about that I'll get to in a second, but like, how much are they going to be able to change things in the middle of the season? How willing are they going to be to move on from Bo Bichette, to move on from Jorge Polanco at first base if one of those doesn't work out, and they're able to create a lineup and a defense that is more replacement level or above, where they're actually getting run prevention there. I think the point that I was going to make before is, I feel about this signing, and I said this in our pre-show, I feel about this signing very similarly to how I felt about Devin Williams signing earlier in this offseason. I said at the time with Devin Williams, I think this is a good signing. You make it a great signing if you keep Edwin Diaz, and you got Williams in your 8th inning, you got Diaz in your 9th inning. I think Bo Bichette is a very good signing. Again, one of the best hitters on the market. It's a very good signing to get the Mets lineup in a better position than it was 24 hours ago. It would be a great signing if you signed Cody Bellinger as well. You get the defense that he brings in the outfield. You get the defense that he brings at first base. You fill both of those spots that are still big question marks, even with this signing, with one guy. And if they're able to get a similar situation with, like you were saying, a shorter term, maybe 125 plus total value, high AAV, you bring in a guy like that who can not only improve your defense, but also the middle of the lineup is ridiculous in terms of, like, you got Lindor at the top, and then you have some combination of Soto, Bichette, and Bellinger in your middle three of the lineup. Like, that is outstanding. And the defense that Bellinger brings, I have no concern about. Again, also Gold Glove caliber, and that would make me feel so much better about this Bichette signing if it's not the only thing that they're doing. And I also, the rotation is a separate issue, pitching is a separate issue, but that's still something the Mets have to think about going forward in this offseason.
Yeah, I think, Bichette helps us. It was a couple of episodes ago where I talked about all the question marks that the Mets had all over the place. If you add Bichette like they did and you add Bellinger, now all of a sudden you remove a lot of those question marks and you feel really good about the state of things, and you're more open to the idea of, okay, Brett Beatty's going to be our DH on opening day. Okay, Carson Bench is going to be our opening day center fielder. You feel better about those types of risks and chances when you have Bo Bichette playing third base, when you have Cody Bellinger potentially out there in the outfield. So the work is not done, whether it's a pitcher or another hitter. The Mets still have work to do, but they land a big fish seemingly out of nowhere today, and they use their financial might to get it done, and they do it the Steve Cohen, David Stearns way. They maximize the dollars, they keep the term small, and they add one of the best hitters available this offseason to their team. It's an awkward, it's a clunky fit, but I think the right-handed ability, I think the leadership, it just feels like exactly what the Mets needed this offseason, and it feels good to see one go through the hoop for the New York Mets on the hitter side, especially when it was just like 10, 12 hours ago that you were dreading once again losing out to the Dodgers for a big-name free agent when you did everything you could. I mean, you put a stupid deal in front of Kyle Tucker that didn't have any deferrals, that had the opt-outs, that was $55 million a season. I mean, you did everything you could to land them, and the Dodgers beat you. It's good to have the pivot, to be prepared. And for those who continue to say the Mets don't have a plan, they have a plan. Like they had Tucker, that was plan A, and they had a very quick pivot to plan B, and now we're going to get to see what the rest of that plan looks like. So exciting times. It was upsetting last night. It was frustrating. I didn't know what the tone of this podcast was going to take without a Bo Bichette signing, but the Mets signed Bo Bichette, and now they've got themselves their opening day third baseman for 2026. Not a sentence I thought I was going to utter here on the pod. If you're new here, rate, review, subscribe to the show wherever you are listening to us. If you want to watch the show, just go to the YouTube channel, Jack McKessie, McKessy, where you can watch the show over there. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week. And as always, let's go Mets.
Let's go Mets.